One digression, and I will digress now while people are still assembling. The digression is this. Remember that I said when Mary Shelley wrote that story that they had met up with the Byrons. Lord Byron was the most famous poet in the world at that time, probably the most famous man in the world, known as much for his rakish and degenerate lifestyle as anything else. Lord Byron had gotten married in the previous year to a lady named Augusta Milbank. She was of the nobility, so was Byron, and they had a daughter. But after 10 months, Byron left England, never to return. He left under a cloud of disgrace, and he went off, and he eventually died. I think it was in 1837, fighting for Greek independence. The Greeks were fighting against the Turks. Lord Byron joined up, used his money to raise his own regiment, caught a fever, and died. That was the end of Lord Byron. He had a daughter, though, Ada Lovelace. As I say, she was 1 month old when Byron last saw her. He wrote some beautiful poetry about her, too, you know, showing his other side. At any rate, Ada Lovelace, Ada's mom, to make a long story short, was determined that her daughter would not follow in her father's footsteps. She was determined, convinced that Lord Byron, her husband, was mad. That's what people called him. They said Lord Byron was mad, bad, and dangerous to know. Like that. Anyway, she was not allowed to have anything to do with poetry, and her mother put her on the path to mathematics. And she took to it like an otter to water. She's just an absolute genius at math. Well, her dad had a 5-pound brain, for God's sakes. Somebody even took it out when he died. Not nice. Anyway, she was really smart. She loved math. And by the time she was 19 years old, she was already an international authority on some aspects of mathematics. And she met a guy named Charles Babbage. Now, I think this is number 90. Is that number 90? Just to... Okay. Charles Babbage, he invented the first modern computer. It was an analog computer, obviously. They didn't have chips back in those days, but it could compute. It was actually not the world's first computer. You know what the world's first computer was? Anybody? Seriously, does anybody know? Somebody out there might. Come on. I'll give you a hint. The ancient Greeks built it. Yes, those clever bastards. But they did. Second century, okay, what happened? In 1901, a Turkish sponge diver was 100 and something feet down on the bottom of the ocean off of Turkey, off an island called Antikythera. Came upon a shipwreck. There were some statues in it, some amphorae, and there was this weird little blob of metal, all corroded. So, didn't know what it was, so he said, oh, that's interesting. So they brought it up, and it ended up in a museum in Turkey. And it wasn't for many years, because, I mean, museums don't have a lot of money, and I assume that Turkish museums even don't have as much money as some other ones do. So it was a long time before anybody looked at this blob. Somebody finally looked at this blob of corroded metal, started applying acids to it and stuff like that to get the corrosion off. And it turned out that it's a mechanism made out of brass that consists of a whole bunch of interlocking wheels and cogs, and they're still working trying to figure this out. But if you turn the dials and wheels on it, it revolves things around and shows you where all the planets are in the solar system at any given time. And it also enables you to predict an eclipse. So somebody had made this in the 2nd century before Christ in the ancient world. So that is probably the world's first computer. If you want to read more about it, it's called the Antikythera mechanism. Antikythera. I might even be able to spell it. That's it. So, Babbage. Ada Lovelace, Lord Byron's daughter, meets him, and they work together for many years. And I just wanted to tell you that, because let's have a picture of Ada Lovelace again. I just want everybody to know that the world's first computer programmer and writer of algorithms, first person in the world to really grasp that the computer could become a big thing, even apart and above and beyond from its computational abilities, was Lord Byron's daughter, Ada Lovelace, world's first writer of algorithms, ladies and gentlemen. Now, early Earth conditions. All right, what do we know for sure about early Earth? I'm talking now about 4.5, 4.3, between 4.54 and 4.01 million or billion years ago. The reason it's 4.01 is because of some rocks up in the north of Canada. Could I have a map, my dear? A map? Poor Denise, she doesn't know what I'm going to do next.
No, I
There we go. North of Canada, okay. Up until recently, South Africa and Greenland, right there in Greenland and down here in South Africa, these had the oldest rocks in the world, and Australia really had them. But in the last few years, Canada has come on big. First, they discovered the rocks in the Acasta gneiss. Gneiss is a type of rock, G-N-E-I-S-S. It's actually pronounced gneiss. That type of rock is a very old rock. It's a metamorphic rock. It started out as a different kind of rock. It started out as igneous, then became sedimentary, ended up as metamorphic. Okay, and these are examples of gneiss. We showed you these before. Light and felsic and dark and mafic. Metally and mafic, light and silicony. What was life like on early Earth? One thing we know for sure, there was no oxygen. Another thing we know for sure, boy I'm neat, is the moon was really close. Show us a picture of the moon, my dear. So if this were 4.51 billion years ago, that's when the moon hit, so just after that. You look up in the sky, you see this gigantic moon. The moon was only maybe 25,000 kilometers away, as opposed to right now where it's 384,400 away. It's a big diff, right? Okay, so when the moon's that close, what do you think the tides were like? Yes, the tides moved at 480 kilometers an hour. That's 300 miles an hour. And they figure they were at least a couple of 100 feet high. But we're getting ahead of ourselves slightly because they also thought there was no water. So there's two ways of looking at the conditions of early Earth, the older way and the newer way. But as I was just telling some people a minute ago, the older way and the newer ways have been reconciled to some extent according to a paper that I was just reading last night, in which Denise knows nothing about. But we'll go more to that in a minute. So the first thing is, they used to think, okay, I'll put it in a nutshell. They used to think it was an atmosphere of methane and ammonia. That's CH4 and NH3, but plus a bit of water, H2O, and a bit of hydrogen, maybe some hydrogen cyanide and a few other things floating around. Okay, very bad atmosphere if you like oxygen. Not a good place. You don't want to be there. So that's what the atmosphere was like. They thought. They also thought it was dry as a bone. Why? Because the moon hit. Now the moon hit. What was that? 4.51 million years ago. What would the moon have done when it hit? Well, the first thing I beg your pardon, the moon didn't hit us. A Mars-sized object hit us and created the moon. But we went through all that. The point is that in doing that, it used to be thought that all the volatiles on Earth would have been blasted away. In other words, Earth would have been left dry as a bone, right? Because if something the size of Mars, I mean, imagine we're sitting here right now, and all of a sudden you look up and something the size of Mars hits us. I mean, none of us would survive, but just think of what it would do to the Earth. Just think of being hit by something that size. It would destroy what hit us. They think that's what happened. And it would probably melt about half the Earth's crust and mantle. But it would probably leave the core more or less intact. So, with that kind of thing happening, no life could have happened, right? They would have thought that early, it would have been dry as a bone. Like when the moon hit, it would have blasted all the water away for good. Therefore, they thought the water must have come from somewhere else later. So, early Earth conditions originally thought no oxygen, no water, no solid crust, because there was, remember the late heavy bombardment between 4.1 and 3.8? In the late heavy bombardment, you have all these things flying down, constantly remelting the crust, constantly keeping the surface of the Earth molten. So everybody thought that between 4.3 4.6 or 4.5 and 4.0 years ago, billion years ago, there could have been no life on Earth because there couldn't have been any water, there couldn't have been a solid crust, and there was no oxygen, and it was just a hellish environment. Thousands of degrees at the beginning, 27 atmospheres pushing down on you. Like we got one right now. So right now we're being hit. Each one of us has got 14.78 pounds per square inch pressure on us. Imagine multiplying that by 27 times what it would feel like. That would not be very comfortable. That would be an atmosphere like they've got on Venus right now. Venus has got a lot of carbon dioxide. What's the temperature of Venus? I told you last time. Come on. Take a stab.
Hot enough to melt lead.
Pretty hot. Hot enough to melt lead. 464 degrees. Lead melts at 327. So that's what it is thought that the early atmosphere on Earth would have been like, right? And then, let me just see if I've covered everything. So it would have been a hellish place. Asteroids, comets, volcanoes, thousands of degrees, crushing pressure of atmosphere, horrible place to live. That was the one way they thought of it. There was another school of thought that said, look, the sun was really weak back then, so it must have been freezing cold. The sun was 30% weaker. Just imagine if that sun up there was 30% weaker right now. That'd be pretty different, wouldn't it? So, yeah, so if it was really 30% weaker, it should have been freezing. Like once it initially cooled off, should have been freezing. So, wasn't it? No, it apparently wasn't. Because, hun, we're going to look at the zircon now, I think.
Okay.
Okay. Just see if I covered it. So the days would have been 5 or 6 hours long. It's hard knowing what things were like because it was thought up until recently that there were no rocks that survived from that early. So there was no rocks. The rocks are the only way we have of knowing what went on because the rocks tell us what the atmosphere was like, what the ocean was like. You know, if it's going to be preserved at all, it's going to be in the rocks. That's about the only way you've got to do it. Like right now, you can go down to Antarctica, you can find ice that's 10,000 years old, so you can look inside that, you can know what the atmosphere was like 10,000 years ago. But this is 4 billion. And so, yeah, that didn't work. So I'm just trying to make sure I cover all my bases here before I move on. So it used to be thought that because the moon was so close, and because there was so much volcanic activity, and because it was constantly bombarded and constantly molten, and there was no oxygen, and no crust, and no water, and a faint young sun, that it would be impossible for there to be any life. Right? It's just a ridiculous idea. And then, oh yeah, and then there's this other theory, it's called Abel, which says between 4.37 and 4.2 billion years ago, all the bioelements that would later make up all life on Earth were delivered, and they were delivered by comets or by asteroids. So there's the idea that, and it's a good idea, everything that is on Earth, everything that we're made of, all came from outer space originally. I told you the oldest thing ever found. Anybody remember what it is? Oldest thing ever found on Earth. Oldest thing we've ever found, the oldest thing that any human being has ever had her or his hands on, was found inside a meteorite that fell in Australia, 1969. Murchison meteorite, not ring a bell? Didn't I tell you?
You mentioned it, yeah.
I mentioned it. Oh, you guys are just, you need a test. You need a test, man. You need a surprise quiz worth 400. Yeah, that'll get you back. Okay, anyway, in 1969, this huge meteorite fell in Murchison, Australia, weighed about 200 kilograms. And actually, forget that, I'm not sure how, I was thinking of something else. Anyway, a big chunk of rock fell in Murchison, Australia in 1969. And of course, they started analyzing it. And they found in analyzing that inside of it was this tiny little bit of silica carbide. And that little bit of silica carbide is 3 billion years older than the solar system. Isn't that something?
Wow.
So inside of a meteorite, chunk of rock, falls to Australia, got you've got several pieces in it that are as old as the solar system. They're like 4.5 billion. But this one is 7.54 billion years old. That just gives me goosebumps just thinking it. Can you imagine holding that in your hand? Something that was around 3 billion years before there was even a solar system? So that's the oldest thing ever found on Earth. But to continue what I was saying earlier, remember I was pointing this at the map, and I was pointing this up where the Northwest Territories were, and I was telling you about old rocks and how we took over from Australia and from South Africa. Well, oh, there's another map. Come on, I can handle it. Throw anything at me. So up here was a rock they discovered called the Acasta Gneiss, and it's on the banks of the Acasta River, and it's about 300 miles from the Great Slave Lake, I think. That's where it's close to. So, and it's 4.01 billion years old, and it is currently the oldest officially recognized rock in the world. And that provides the end date for the Hadean. So the Hadean goes from the formation of the Earth, 4.54 billion years old, to 4.01 billion years old, which is the date of the Acasta Gneiss. Since then, or Acasta Gneiss, sorry. Since then, they found an older rock. Some guys from McGill, Canada, were up here, and they discovered some rocks that are dated between 3.75 and 4.28 billion years old, making that the oldest rock in the world. Now, there are people, not Canadians, I'm sorry to say, who don't think it was the oldest rock. So there is some disagreement. But they dated it two ways. They dated it by zircons and got 4.28, and they dated it by other methods as well and got 3.75. Either way, it's either the oldest rock on the face of the Earth or it's right up there. And let's see a zircon now. And it's these zircons that changed our mind about what the ancient world... Okay, I won't be rushed. I don't do well when I'm rushed. I forget things, doesn't work out. So I'm just gonna carry on calmly, breathe deeply, channel my chakras or whatever. Okay.
I'll get the Maharishi out.
This is a marvelous thing. This is a zircon. Zircons are probably the toughest things on the planet. They seem to be able to resist just about anything. And some of them have been around a really long time. And back in 2001, some researchers were out in northwestern Australia in the Jack Hills, and they found a whole bunch of zircons, and one of them was a cool 4.404 billion years old. So that's the oldest mineral ever found on Earth that's from Earth, because the other one I told you about obviously wasn't. It came from out there. So that's a zircon. The great thing about zircons is they're super tough. They can be part of rocks, and the other rocks can all erode away and break up and disappear, but the zircons hang on. The really cool thing about zircons is when they're made, they've always got uranium in them. Uranium loves zircons. So zircons come with uranium in them, and the uranium is set. So the uranium in this zircon from the Jack Hills is uranium-238. That's an isotope of uranium. Does anybody know what an isotope is? Denise wants me to ask you this question, because I've said several times what an isotope is. Denise says, ask him what an isotope is. Come on, make my day. No? Nobody knows what an isotope. Oh, you guys are asking for it, I'm telling you. I'm gonna go away right now and make up the world's biggest test. What an isotope is, it's an atom, like, okay, take carbon, okay? Carbon has got 6 protons and 6 neutrons and 6 electrons, normally, if it's a nice normal carbon atom. But if it's an isotope, it's got more neutrons than protons, and that's all there is to it. But we need to know what isotopes are, because they're absolutely invaluable in dating this kind of stuff. You can look at an isotope, and you can tell by looking at that isotope, if you know what you're doing and you take all things into consideration, you can tell what the climate was like a billion years ago. You can tell whether it was warm and things were evaporating, or you can tell whether it was cold and things were precipitating. You can tell whether there was a lot of life around and it was gobbling up carbon like crazy and assimilating it into its tissues metabolically, like it does when it's building up the macromolecules, or not. This, sorry, what was my point there?
You were talking about what isotopes are good for.
Yeah, okay, so what they're good for is, let me give you an idea with carbon. Okay, carbon will work. So carbon, ordinarily, carbon is 12, then it's got 6 protons and 6 neutrons. Nothing hard about it. You got your electron. Let's see, you're gonna have 2 here. You're also gonna have 4 here. So now you've got 6, and then you've got your nucleus, and this is the important part, okay? In the nucleus are 6 protons. They've got to match the number of electrons, 6 electrons, 6 protons, and normally you're going to have 6 neutrons. But if you're, oh God, I almost sat in that, that's serious. If you're carbon-13, instead of having 6 neutrons, you've got 7. So now your number as a carbon is no longer carbon-12, it's now carbon-13. 6 and 7, 13. I can do these things in my head because we had to memorize stuff when I went to school. So you've got that zircon, and that zircon has got a radioactive element in it, which is an isotope. And the isotope that the zircon has got in it is an isotope of uranium. It's called uranium-238. And all uranium-238, this is the beauty of it, all uranium-238 started at the same time in our solar system. It was all set at the same time, so it all started at the same time. And what it does in its lifetime is it decays at a perfectly steady rate into lead. Nearly all the lead on the face of the Earth came from uranium. The 2 main kinds, uranium-238 and uranium-235. They both got a different number of isotopes, and they both decay at different rates. Uranium-238, I think I'm right on this. I think uranium-238 has got a half-life of 4.46 billion years. And I think that uranium-235 has got a half-life of 703 million years. But I may have them backwards. I'm just telling you that. It's possible. I may have those 2 backwards. But it doesn't matter, because the fact is, there's uranium in there. Yeah, it's uranium-238 in the zircon, I'm sure of that. And that uranium-238 has a half-life. Let's say that I am right, and the half-life is 4.46 billion years. That means in 4.46 billion years, half of that uranium is going to have turned into another element. It won't have turned into lead, because it doesn't get to lead till it's done about 9 or 10 different transitions. It turns into a bunch of other things first, but ends up as lead. So next time you look at lead, you think, ha, you don't fool me. I know you used to be uranium at one time. No longer radioactive. Isn't that cool? I mean, it's neat. Anyway, there's your zircon. It's got radioactive material in it, and that radioactive material ticks away like a clock. And you just look at that clock, and it tells you how old something is. And that's how come we know that it's 4.404 billion years old. Isn't that amazing? So, zircons are cool. Here's the other thing, though. Zircons can only form where there's water. All right? So, this zircon is 4.4 billion years old. They used to think that there couldn't have been any water, couldn't have been any hard surface, couldn't have been any life on Earth before about 3 billion years old. That was the old thinking, because they thought that the Earth was so inhospitable, such a horrible place, that it would have been taken literally almost 1 billion years for life to arise. All of a sudden, they find that in 2001. And that tells us that when that was formed, there was a solid surface on Earth 4.4 billion years ago, because water can't form except on a solid surface. Now we know, I just found this out last night, I discovered this other paper, that this thing was actually formed at 680 degrees Celsius. And that is exactly the point, according to the author of this study, that any substance, any rock, meeting any water, will, at that temperature, turn into, will melt. So this rock was almost at a melting temperature, not quite. Now, if you're like me, you're thinking, wait a minute, isn't a melting temperature like 100 degrees? Yes. But with 27 atmospheres of pressure bearing down on you, you stay as a liquid. That's what physics says. Physics won't let you become a liquid if it's applying a lot of pressure. The pressure's got to be eased off, and then you can become a liquid. That's why the very center of the Earth is solid, because it's too much pressure for it to be anything else. But as soon as you get to the outer core, it's liquid. And that sloshing liquid, that metal down there, that iron and nickel, which is sloshing around, is what gives us our dynamo, and that's what gives us our magnetic field. Do you want to show us the magnetic field?
I can't remember the number, but I'm looking, I think it's 19.
I can't remember the magnetic field.
Yeah,
Oh, there it is.
Yeah.
And my hero, James Clerk Maxwell. Yeah, how long have we had the magnetic field? That's an important thing, because everybody thought, well, there couldn't have been a magnetic field back there either. Why do we need a magnetic field? Does anybody know?
Protect us from the sun.
Yes.
So what?
Protect us from the sun.
To protect us from the sun. It both giveth and it taketh away. Remember that young sun? Let's look at number 20, the electromagnetic spectrum.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Now, remember I told you last time, and I'm going to remind you of this, because that is what makes the Earth hot or cold, because CO2 traps heat in the infrared, just in the infrared. So when electromagnetic radiation is coming in, some of it goes out, some of it goes in. That which comes in gets trapped by CO2 or methane or water vapor, any of the greenhouse gases in the infrared. That's how it works. Now the early young sun, the faint young sun, it was 30% fainter, but I'm pretty sure I told you this already. It was also a lot more active in the ultraviolet. And ultraviolet is what kills us. Like, you got to protect yourself from ultraviolet radiation, because ultraviolet radiation is ionizing radiation. That means that it knocks electrons right out of atoms. You don't want a bunch of ionizing radiation getting into your body and knocking your electrons one way or your protons another. That's not good for you. That wrecks your DNA. Burns the end right off the telomeres. That's why we've got these little caps on the end of our telomeres in our DNA that help to protect us. But UV is not good for us. So the earlier we got the protection, the better. But people used to think, well, that's another reason there couldn't have been any life back before, say, 3.5 billion or 3 billion years ago, because there wouldn't have been a magnetic field. The other thing that you've got to consider is, remember I was banging on about plate tectonics, right? And how plate tectonics are the way that the planet controls its temperature by recycling carbon dioxide. Well, they used to think plate tectonics didn't get going until about 2.5 billion years ago. But, again, I'm trying to keep up, so I'm reading some stuff again last night and the day before, and it looks like the thinking now is coming around to the idea that there could have been plate tectonics as early as 4.2 or 4.3 billion years ago. So if that's true, that changes a lot. We could have had a magnetic field a lot earlier. Oh, sorry, Craig, I didn't mean to shine that in your eye. We could have had a...
Do it again.
By the way, Craig came all the way from Vancouver just to take in the lecture. He's my old buddy from school, and he came all the way up here, and that's Craig, and I just wanted to introduce you to him. He's a really cool guy. Knows more about mushrooms than most human beings on the face of the earth. Really nice. Puts up beautiful, beautiful pictures. I watch them every day. Oh, okay, there's John Tuzo Wilson, Canadian, and he was the guy that came up with that idea that continental plate tectonics, how it recycles everything eternally. So let me just finish tonight by telling you then about how we think about early life now. So that's the old way, right? But ever since the discovery of the zircon, and ever since we've gone into outer space, and ever since we've gone down to the bottom of the ocean, we have realized that things were probably a lot different. The early atmosphere, yes, was probably methane and ammonia, but only sometimes, and the other times it was probably nitrogen and carbon dioxide. Again, I just read a paper last night that said that the meteor bombardment, you remember the meteor bombardment, and I'm going to leave it at this. The meteor bombardment came down. Each time one of these huge balls of rock came down and hit the Earth, it would have vaporized a lot of the crust, some of the mantle, and most of the ocean. And it would have thrown a whole bunch of material up as vapor and melt into the atmosphere. That would have taken a couple of thousand years to come back down, and when it came back down, it would have left in the atmosphere a bunch of hydrogen. That hydrogen then would have combined with the carbon dioxide and with the nitrogen to create methane and ammonia. So it used to be, so they've been arguing, was it methane and ammonia, or was it carbon dioxide and nitrogen? The carbon dioxide and nitrogen people seem to be in the majority these days, but now we've got that other explanation that shows that they may both be right. So isn't that nice? Everybody's happy. So the early Earth we're going to see, and we will do this again, I hope, sometime. I need a bit of a break now, I'm a bit tired, but I would like to carry these on. And I will, eventually, if I live long enough, you know, get to explaining all the way down here. But it's just, I was telling some people earlier, next time we do this, whatever that is, I think we can easily finish off the Hadean and do probably next couple of billion years. A lot of stuff happens, but I think we can do it. I've got all the preliminary stuff out of the way now. All I've got to do is I pretty much done conditions on early Earth. So when I see you again, what we will do is I will then go through what DNA and RNA are, brief explanation of how they work, a brief explanation of the three main theories on how life started, and then we'll just start going through all the different periods. We'll be looking at bacteria and archaea first. Well, we'll look at things that are more primitive than that first. We'll look at bits of carbon that they found in rocks. They found some bits of carbon in those really old rocks that I told you about up in northern Canada that they think are the earliest life on Earth. And some people are down with that, and other people think it's wrong. But yeah, that's where we'll start. We'll look at, not at fossils, because before there were fossils, there were bits of what are called biogenic carbon that used to belong to living things. But the living things are no longer preserved in the rocks, but bits of the carbon that made them up are. And I'm going to end on an isotope then. Denise will love me for this. Because again, isotopes enable us to tell stuff like that. If you're a plant and you've got a choice about two different kinds of carbon to use, a light kind, carbon-12, or a heavier kind, carbon-13, you're going to choose the light one. If you've got to do a job, you got to take a furnace into somebody's house, you're going to want the lightest furnace you can get, right? You're going to minimize your work. Makes sense. So if you're carbon, you're going to work with, if you're a living thing, living down in the bottom of the ocean, say like a worm or something, or say you're an oyster, and you're down there in the bottom of the ocean, and you're taking in carbon dioxide, and you're mixing it with calcium, and you're making your shell, and you're living away. What kind of carbon do you want to work with? Do you want to work with heavy carbon or light carbon? You want to work with a light carbon, right? So when biologists come along later and they're looking at a fossil organism, they can tell by how much light carbon or heavy carbon is whether it was alive or not. If it was alive, all the carbon in there is going to be light. Not all of it, but the ratio is going to be on the light side. If on the fact it wasn't alive, there's going to be a lot more of the other stuff. That's why you need to know about isotopes. So I'll leave it at that. I hope we meet again someday, at which point I will continue on with the saga. Yes, ma'am.
How much of a break do you need? How long?
I don't know. I just...
This is so interesting.
Well, would you be interested in hearing more?
Yes.
Okay, good. Would that be a majority sort of thing, do you think?
I'm afraid so.
Okay, good.
Just how long of a break do you
Well, I don't know. I need a month or so. We'll talk it over with...
Yeah.
We'll have to figure things out, right? We've had some preliminary... But, yeah, it's been a hard five weeks, eh? Mainly because of me. I've been having a hard time because I honestly have had a hell of a job trying to organize it. But I think I'm more or less straightened away now.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying it's going to be lightning fast, but we should be able to progress through. I mean, I can't digress because nothing's a digression. Anyway.
Hey, hon.
So, yeah.
And then maybe we can sing them the Calvin cycle.
Oh, yeah. one of the most, okay, photosynthesis is the most crucial, I guess it's one of that and respiration are two most crucial metabolism things on Earth. And we even found this cool song. Part of the photosynthesis is the Calvin cycle. It was made up by a guy called, believe it or not, his name was Melvin Calvin. I love parents, don't you? But anyway, Melvin Calvin, yes. The Calvin cycle, I mean, it's one of the most important things in the universe because it makes all the food in the universe. Carbohydrates, C6H12O6. That's how you make it. Calvin cycle. So there's a song about it. We'll have to play him that song. The Calvin cycle. It's disco, man. You can just rock to it. Anyway, I'll say good night now and thank you very much and hope to see you again before too long. Appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Before everybody leaves, there's something that I wanted to say.
Sure.
Claire's not allowed to do this, so I said I'm going to get up and say something because nobody ever does. The library is very valuable. We get to hear lectures like this. We've got all the valuable ingredients of the library and all the help of the librarians. So if anyone would like to make a donation, down at the welcome desk would be a really good place to do it. It's not obligatory. I'm just saying nobody ever asks us for donations because they're not allowed to.
Can I say something too?
Yeah?
You can become a friend of the library. Are you still taking friends?
Yes.
And it's only $5.
Yes.
And you get on the mailing list and you get all sorts of information and we do have get-togethers. $5 to become a friend of the library.
And you'll know when Al's going to give another lecture.
I love this place. I just feel totally at home in here. It's weird, isn't it? But even when I walk into a library anywhere in the world, I immediately feel at home.
Yes, so do I.
But this one is special.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's cool. It's cool.
It
Thank you
is.
very much again. I have a really good time over the years doing this. You know,
Maybe
so
in the
thanks.
fall.
Thank you.
Maybe in the fall. Everybody's busy in the summer, right?
Too many gardeners.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much for coming out. Really appreciate it.
Good job, bud.
Thanks, man.
Yeah. No doubt.
I could use a bit of a rest. Hey, you guys are coming over. Bring those pictures, right? I never saw them.
Yeah, one day.
Yeah.
Well, do it soon now, okay? Because I'm not under the gun anymore. I'm not busy. So,
It's probably good to take a little bit of a break and
Yeah,
now let someone else talk.
I'd like it. I mean, I want to do more. I just don't want to have a deadline hanging over my head. Yeah, a bit if I can help
It's a
it.
lot of pressure.
Yeah, it is a lot of
So are
pressure.
you gonna keep, are they gonna keep this up or, because to me this is like a work of art.
Oh, well, well, actually, I mean, they were really nice. We never had to put up just so.
But let me get a picture in front of your board. And remember you drew the shark.
Oh,
I
yeah.
like the shark.
Well, what I plan to do is do more
I know.
That's a good one. Let's get one over here.
over here. Yes.
I'll send these to Denise.
The
The famous flip chart.
famous flip chart, right?
You gave it to me, just go ahead and draw yours.
Awesome.
Once I get this
Good.
started,
Awesome.
I will